Hi, welcome to EMDR with Alice. So last time we talked about when to do cognitive interweaves. Today, I'd like to talk about the types of cognitive interweaves that are out there. And there's a large variety of cognitive interweaves. So we talked some last time about like the purpose, when you want to use them, why you would be using them. And so today we'll talk about the types so that you can make the decision on what's the appropriate one to use at the appropriate time. So when we think about cognitive interweaves, I often try to teach people that you can actually do a little bit of cheating in terms of predicting clients that might need more cognitive interweaves, and you can tell that by what you're doing in phases 1 and 2. And so you begin listening for kind of the 4 different categories that clients can get stuck in when dealing with the aftermath of trauma. Those 4 categories, and Francine talks about this in her book, are being stuck in shame or kind of self-deprecating spaces. So that shame space, they're stuck in a sense of responsibility. And so everything's kind of their fault. Even in present life, like they kind of blame themselves for everything. They really seem to be stuck in that loop. A third category is safety, not feeling safe. So there's a lot of hypervigilance, a lot of awareness around safety concerns. And then the 4th category would be the sense of powerlessness or helplessness, that victim kind of place of feeling really small and helpless. So those are the 4 areas I tend to start listening for when I'm working with clients. Now, keep in mind when you're working with complex trauma, you may hear them kind of struggling in several of those areas, which would make sense with the context of what they've experienced. But in terms of like, where would I predict I might need a cognitive interweave might look like when you're doing your prep work or you're talking with clients around kind of present triggers, and maybe you're teaching some tools and resources in your prep work, and their system seems to not be able to accept these other coping skills, or they still seem to kind of ruminate or get stuck in these patterns of those 4 categories. If that's the case, then I am a clinician. I'm going to predict, that's really steeped in that neural network. It's probably, once we get into reprocessing, that's where we're going to get stuck, right? And so I can already go ahead and do 2 things to prep for that. One is I can tailor my resources, my psychoeducation around that area in my prep, my phase 2, and so that I'm specifically addressing that place that they're stuck with their trauma in my prep work. And then the second area I can be prepared for is I can go ahead and familiarize myself with the cognitive interweaves that correlate with that particular category. And again, Francine has this in her books. You can also find this a lot of times in other kind of EMDR related books. So for example, if it's a client who's really stuck around the sense of responsibility and we're working on a young kind of childhood experience or trauma, then I might use a cognitive interweave that helps bring in perspective, like an adult perspective that shifts, like, okay, can a kid actually be responsible for something like this? Like, can it be a kid's fault? And so I might use a cognitive interweave that brings in that different perspective, which helps connect them to their adaptive network of their adult networks. So again, I've prepped with that because I've seen that's where they've been stuck in the earlier phases. And so I know, okay, if we do get stuck in this in phase 4, 5, or 6, I'm going to bring in a cognitive interweave like this that kind of brings in that perspective. If they seem to be stuck in, let's say, that category of like powerlessness, I might bring in a cognitive interweave that begins to differentiate where they might have choices or power now versus what was different when they were little, where they really didn't have any choices, right? They just had the choices in front of them or what they could developmentally do at that stage. But now they're kind of maybe have learned more in life, have more skills available to them, have more opportunities. So I might differentiate between those two as my cognitive interweave. So again, kind of knowing that where you're hearing where they're stuck in those prep phases kind of helps you then prep for both in your phase 2, teaching some skills related specifically to that place that they're stuck, but also beginning to bring in psychoeducation around places that they're stuck is all part of your prep. And I'm going to also kind of flag inside myself here, oh, I'm going to look up the cognitive interweaves that might fit in that category because I'm going to be prepared that they may get stuck around that when we get into reprocessing. So that's one piece. Now, we talked about there's kind of 4 categories of cognitive places people get stuck. But so when we're looking at cognitive interweaves, there's kind of different categories of cognitive interweaves. So they are kind of in those categories of safety, powerlessness, responsibility, and oh goodness, what was that other one that I just said? Safety, responsibility, shame. So if they're stuck in those, right? Another kind of way to think about the cognitive interweaves we bring in there's psychoeducation type interweaves that are short and sweet. It's usually, I've already done the psychoeducation in phase 2. So my interweave is a reminder. So, because remember, I'm just bringing up adaptive information that's already there and helping connect to that right in the present moment. So psychoeducation is kind of a category of cognitive interweave. Perspective shifting is a category of cognitive interweave where either I bring in the perspective of a friend or a nurturing caregiver or someone that they trust, a wise figure, or I bring in their own adult perspective just to get that shift. Another way of getting perspective shift is a cognitive interweave where we invite them to look at the memory like we're looking through a window, right? Or we're watching it from the outside. And again, that helps bring in that adult perspective or that outside perspective. So perspective shift is a type of interweave. Another type of interweave might be a somatic-based interweave where we're actually working with the body and where something might be stuck in the body. And that can involve like movements, inviting different movements, either continuing a movement that they're already doing in reprocessing or inviting them to try an opposite movement. There's some great information on somatic interweaves in Ariel Schwartz's work if you want to look her up. And then another category of cognitive interweave is really just how it's helping hold the truth of the moment, which is using the AIP. How is whatever's happening right now in this moment actually part of the memory and connected to the memory? And so holding the truth of that is another way we might do cognitive interweaves. And then lastly, another cognitive interweave kind of category that I think of from an attachment standpoint is the missing experience. And so this has to do a lot with like the therapist's demeanor and the connection that the therapist has with the client. And sometimes even offering permission for the client to do something that they couldn't do at the time, right? So it might be offering them permission to cry. Maybe they couldn't cry at the time. Offering them permission to move if they need to move might be part of it. And that's a missing experience, right? Because maybe they were frozen at the time or they couldn't move because it wasn't safe. So offering a missing experience. It also looks like when a client is in a full kind of abreaction of like releasing with crying or somatic abreaction releasing with like shaking or trembling, I'll do a cognitive interweave while I'm doing the bilateral of just talking and welcoming that experience here in the present and just helping the client stay present with it, right? Staying present with that experience and just follow it until it seems to resolve. And so essentially it's helping invite the client to stay present with the distress and disturbance so that they can do that in a safe way. So this is just an addition, adding to what we did last time. So if you haven't watched the last video, you can check that one out on when to do cognitive interweaves. And this one is like, what are the types of cognitive interweaves that gives you an opportunity to begin making informed decisions about what you use and when you use it. Thank you for joining us.